So let's set the scene. We're not in some grand lecture hall. We're actually in a pretty grim place, an Athenian prison cell.
Right. Socrates has been condemned. The sentence is death by hemlock. But there's this strange pause.
Yeah, a delay? Why?
Because of a religious tradition. The sacred ship sent annually to Delos hasn't returned yet.
And Athens can't have any state executions while it's away? Is that it?
Exactly. So this enforced waiting period, it transforms everything. It gives Socrates this unexpected window.
A window to do what? Turn his own death into one last philosophy class?
Pretty much. That's exactly what Plato captures for us in the Phaedo. It's not just a man dying, it's a philosopher teaching right up to the end.
And that's our mission for this deep dive, isn't it? To really unpack the arguments he uses in these final hours. He's trying to convince his friends, Simmias and Cebes, that, well, death isn't the end they fear.
Right. He's arguing for the immortality of the soul using some pretty complex logic. And it's fascinating how he kicks it all off.
Before the big arguments even start.
Yeah. It begins with something really simple, almost physical. Credo's there, his family's just left, he's been freed from his leg irons.
And he's just sitting there rubbing his leg where the chains were.
Mm-hmm. And he has this observation about pleasure and pain.
Ah, right. He notes how strange it is that the one follows the other so closely. The pain from the chains goes, and then comes the pleasure of relief.
Exactly. He finds it curious, They're opposites, but they seem fundamentally linked. Like you can't really have one without the other tagging along soon after.
He says if Aesop were writing a fable about it.
He'd say the gods tried to stop them fighting, couldn't, so just tie their heads together, so wherever one goes, the other has to follow.
It's a brilliant little observation from pure physical sensation. And it kind of sets the stage, doesn't it? This idea of linked opposites.
It really does, because it pivots almost immediately to the biggest pair of opposites, life and death.
And that's where he makes that really provocative claim.
The one that baffles his friends.
That the true philosopher is always, in a sense, pursuing death and dying.
And therefore should actually meet death cheerfully. He says he has good hope about where he's going.
Which, understandably, is hard for his grieving friends to swallow. Why would the wisest man want to leave life? Especially if, as they argue later, life is service to the best possible masters, the gods.
That's the core tension. And to resolve it, we have to get into Socrates' whole conception of what philosophy is, what the philosophical life entails.
Okay, so let's get into part one, philosophy as the practice of dying. But first, there's that slightly odd detour, isn't there? The poetry?
Oh, yeah, the poet's scruple. It's a lovely little detail. Here he is, the ultimate rationalist, spending his last days turning Aesop's fables into verse.
Why on earth would he do that?
Well, he explains he'd had these recurring dreams throughout his life, telling him simply to make music.
And he'd always interpreted that metaphorically.
Right. He figured philosophy, the pursuit of truth, was the highest form of music. That was his music making.
But now, facing death, he gets a bit literal.
Kind of. He thinks, well, maybe the dream meant music in the ordinary sense. And since he's got this unexpected free time thanks to the ship, he should probably cover his bases, just in case.
So he picks Aesop because he's not really an inventor of stories himself.
Exactly. It shows this meticulous side to him, doesn't it? Like a spiritual diligence. Don't leave any divine instruction unfulfilled, even if you're not sure you interpreted it right the first time.
Okay, so that explains the poetry. But this talk of divine commands leads straight into a really tricky area. Suicide.
It does. He tells Cebes to pass a message to their friend Evenus. Basically, follow me soon if you are wise, but don't take matters into your own hands.
Because suicide is forbidden. That seems like the biggest contradiction right there. If the philosopher spends his life preparing for death, why isn't taking the shortcut allowed?
Socrates grounds this in what he calls a secret doctrine. The idea is that we humans are like prisoners. We can't just break out of our prison.
Prisoners of whom? Or what?
Prisoners of the gods. He argues that the gods are our guardians, our masters, and we are their possessions.
That sounds harsh. Like we're just property.
It does have that implication.
Yeah.
He compares it to your ox or your ass suddenly deciding to dispatch itself without your permission. You'd be angry, wouldn't you?
I suppose. But applying that to humans.
For Socrates, it's about piety. The gods care for us. They are good masters. To kill yourself without a divine signal, without being summoned, is basically an act of rebellion against your rightful owner. It's disrespecting their authority and their care.
So it's about willingness versus agency. You have to be willing to go when called, but you can't make the call yourself.
That's the distinction he draws. But Cebes immediately spots the problem with this.
The logical flaw.
Yeah. Steve says, okay, if the gods are truly the best possible masters, wouldn't the wisest man be the most reluctant to leave their service? It should be the fool who rejoices at escaping his master, not the wise man like Socrates.
That's a really strong point. If Socrates is so cheerful about dying, doesn't that imply he thinks he knows better than the gods? Or that he doesn't actually believe they're the best guardians?
It puts Socrates in a tight spot. How does he justify his cheerfulness without undermining his own premise about the gods' goodness?
So how does he get out of it?
His answer is actually quite moving. He says he isn't just leaving the god's service, he has a firm hope that he is going to other gods who are also wise and good.
Ah, so it's a transfer, not an abandonment.
Exactly. And possibly, he adds, to the company of good men who have already died, men perhaps even better than those he's leaving behind on Earth. So his hope isn't rooted in escaping service, but in moving to a higher, better form of it.
Okay, that reframes it completely. His cheerfulness comes from faith in a better destination, managed by equally good, or maybe even better, divine masters.
Precisely. And that belief perfectly justifies the philosophical lifestyle he's been describing the idea of philosophy as a practice of dying.
Because if death is just a transition to a better state, then preparing for it makes perfect sense.
Right. And how does the philosopher prepare? By actively trying to separate the soul from the body, even while alive.
How does that work in practice?
It means disdaining the body's demands and pleasures, excessive food, drink, fine clothes, sex. The philosopher tries as much as possible to detach from these things, to be quit of the body and turn to the soul.
It's not just about being ascetic for its own sake, then. It's a deliberate training.
A training for separation. Socrates himself points out that ordinary people look at philosophers living this way and think they're basically half dead already.
Because they're withdrawing from what most people consider life.
Exactly. The philosopher is voluntarily practicing the very separation that death imposes involuntarily on everyone else. They're rehearsing.
Which leads us neatly into the next big section, why this separation is so crucial for the philosopher's actual goal, achieving knowledge.
Right. Why is the body seen not just as something to be managed, but as an active hindrance to wisdom?
So, part 2. The pursuit of pure knowledge. Why exactly is the body such an obstacle?
Socrates really goes after the senses here. He asks point blank, are sight and hearing actually accurate? Do they give us truth?
And his answer is a definite no.
A resounding no. He calls them inaccurate witnesses. Think about it. Even our best senses, sight and hearing, are often mistaken or unclear. If they're unreliable, what hope do we have for the others, like touch or taste?
So the body fundamentally misleads us about reality.
It filters reality, and imperfectly at that. But it's worse than just inaccurate perception. The body is a source of constant, endless trouble.
How so? Beyond just needing food and sleep.
Well, there's the basic needs, the susceptibility to illness. But Socrates goes further. He blames the body for all our emotional turmoil, loves and lusts and fears and fancies and every sort of folly.
He's saying our emotions stem from our physical nature.
Largely, yes. And he makes this incredible leap. He claims the body isn't just a personal problem, it's the root cause of all societal conflict.
Whoa, how does he get there?
He asks, for whence come wars and fightings and factions? Whence but from the body and the lusts of the body?
Okay, spell that out. How does my needing lunch cause a war?
It's about the pursuit of resources for the body. We need money, right? Not for the sake of coins, but to buy things, food, shelter, comforts, healthcare, all things the body requires or desires.
Okay.
This need for money, he argues, driven by the body's demands, leads to greed, competition, and ultimately conflict between individuals and states as they fight over the resources needed to serve the body.
That's a pretty sweeping claim. The body is the engine of war.
It's radical, but if you accept his premise that the body is this source of constant need, inaccurate information, emotional chaos, and conflict, then his next point follows logically.
Which is?
That true knowledge, the kind the philosopher seeks, cannot possibly be attained through the body.
Because the object of true knowledge is different.
Exactly. True knowledge for Socrates and Plato is about grasping the form's unchanging, perfect concepts like absolute justice, absolute beauty, absolute good. These aren't things you can see or touch.
They exist in a realm beyond the senses.
Precisely. You can't perceive absolute beauty with your eyes or absolute justice with your hands. These truths must be grasped by the intellect alone.
So how do you get the intellect clear enough to do that?
By minimizing the body's interference. Knowledge is best attained, Socrates says, when the mind is gathered into herself, free from sensory noise, no sights, no sounds, no pain, no pleasure, just pure thought, aspiring to grasp pure being.
This sounds like the core of Platonism, the distrust of the sensory world and the focus on the intelligible realm.
It is, and this leads directly to his definition of purification.
What the philosopher is actually doing.
Yes, purification is the separation of the soul from the body. It's the release of the soul from the chains of physical existence. It's about trying to live as much as possible while still embodied in a state of pure rationality.
So if that's the goal, and pure knowledge is impossible while tangled up with the body,
Then the inescapable conclusion is that true knowledge can only be fully attained, if at all, after death.
when the soul is finally free, in herself alone.
Right. And this explains why the true philosopher, the lover of wisdom, philosophia, shouldn't fear death. They've spent their whole lives practicing for this moment of release.
Death becomes the graduation ceremony, not the execution.
Exactly. It's the moment they finally get unobstructed access to the wisdom they've always pursued. To fear it would be, well, utterly illogical for someone dedicated to that pursuit.
Okay, so the philosophical life is practice for death, and death is potentially the gateway to true knowledge. But this still doesn't absolutely prove the soul survives death, does it? It just makes it desirable for the philosopher.
Correct. That's why Socrates needs to shift gears now into actual proofs for the soul's continued existence and even its pre-existence.
And this brings us to one of his most famous doctrines, anamnesis.
Recollection. The idea that learning isn't acquiring new information, but actually remembering knowledge the soul possessed before birth.
How does he argue for that? It sounds pretty out there.
He starts with simple examples of association. You see something and it reminds you of something else.
Like seeing a lyre reminds a lover of the person who owned it.
Exactly. Or seeing simias might make you think of sebs if they're usually together. The memory can be triggered by similar things or even dissimilar things that are just associated in your mind. That's the basic mechanism.
Okay, memory works by association. How does that prove pre-existence?
He pivots from remembering everyday objects or people to remembering abstract concepts, specifically the concept of equality, absolute equality.
Not just two sticks being roughly the same length, but the idea of perfect equality itself.
Precisely. He asks us to consider, when we see two sticks or stones and call them equal, are they ever perfectly equal?
No, probably not. Under a microscope, one would always be slightly different. They fall short.
They fall short. That's the key phrase. We recognize their deficiency. But how can we recognize that they fall short of perfect equality unless we already have a concept of perfect equality in our minds to compare them against?
Ah, I see. To know something is imperfectly equal, you must first know what perfectly equal means.
Exactly. You need the standard to judge the copy. And since we perceive these imperfect physical equals through our senses, which we acquire at birth,
Then the knowledge of the perfect standard, absolute equality, must have been acquired before birth.
that's the logical leap. The same applies, he argues, to other absolute forms. Absolute beauty, absolute goodness, absolute justice. Our ability to even think about these perfect concepts and to recognize their imperfect manifestations in the world implies we knew them beforehand.
So the soul must have existed in a state where it encountered these forms directly before it entered a human body.
Yes. That prior existence is where the knowledge originated. Birth, he suggests, causes us to forget this knowledge.
And learning, especially through philosophy, is the process of recollecting it.
Right. He even ties this back to his definition of knowing something, being able to give a reason or an account logos of it. Most people can't perfectly define justice or beauty on the spot.
Which suggests they're in the process of remembering, not that they never knew.
Correct. So the conclusion is pretty stark. If these absolute forms exist, and Socrates' whole philosophy depends on them existing, then the soul must necessarily have existed before birth to have encountered them.
The pre-existence of the soul and the existence of the forms become mutually dependent. One implies the other.
They stand or fall together, as he says. This gives him a solid argument for the soul existing before life, but it still doesn't guarantee it exists after life.
Right. That's the lingering fear, isn't it? Pre-existence is one thing, but surviving death, actually being immortal, is another. And this is where his friends, Simmias and Cebes, raise some really serious objections.
They do. They aren't just passive listeners. They're actively testing his arguments. Simmias goes first with a really powerful analogy.
The soul's harmony argument.
Exactly. It's quite elegant. Simmias compares the soul to the harmony produced by a lyre.
Okay, how does that work?
Well, the harmony is invisible. It's beautiful. It seems divine, much like the soul is often described. The lyre itself, the wood and the strings, that's the body. Physical, composite, earthly, mortal.
Right.
Now what happens, Simmias asks, if you smash the lyre or cut the strings?
The harmony disappears instantly.
Instantly, even if the bits of wood and string are still lying there. The harmony, being dependent on the physical structure and the correct tension, ceases to exist the moment that structure is destroyed or significantly altered.
So the analogy is, the body is the lyre, the soul is the harmony. When the body dies or breaks down,
The soul, like the harmony, must perish immediately. It can't exist independently of the physical structure that generated it.
that's a really strong challenge. It basically frames the soul as an emergent property of the body, not a separate substance.
It's a very sophisticated objection, essentially arguing for epiphenomenalism.
Yeah.
And Socrates knows he has to address it directly. He offers two main rebuttals.
What's the first?
He points out a direct contradiction with the argument they just agreed on recollection.
How does it contradict recollection?
Well, a harmony is something that comes after the parts that create it, right? The lyre and strings have to exist before the harmony can be produced.
Okay, yes, harmony is a result.
But they had already established, through the recollection argument, that the soul must pre-exist the body to have knowledge of the forms.
Ah. So the soul can't be both pre-existent, as required by recollection, and a result of the body, as implied by the harmony analogy.
Exactly. Simmias can't hold both views consistently. Since he found the recollection argument convincing, he has to concede that the harmony analogy must be flawed. It's a brilliant piece of dialectic, using Simmias's own prior agreement against the analogy.
That's clever. What's the second rebuttal?
The second focuses on moral agency and degrees of soulness, if you like.
Moral agency.
Yes. If the soul is just a harmony, it should passively reflect the state of the body, shouldn't it? It should just follow the tensions and relaxations of the physical element.
Like the sound follows the strings.
Right. But Socrates argues, do we actually observe the soul behaving like that? Or does the soul often fight against the body's desires and impulses?
It definitely seems to. We restrain ourselves, we feel guilt, we try to direct our bodies.
Precisely. Socrates even quotes Homer Odysseus telling his own heart to endure. The soul acts like a master commanding a slave, the body and its passions, not like a passive effect. A harmony can't command the instrument.
That makes sense. The soul seems to have a will of its own, often opposing the body.
And then there's the issue of degrees. If the soul is a harmony resulting from the body's composition, then wouldn't all souls essentially be equally soul or equally harmonized?
Meaning, all souls will be equally good.
That seems to be the implication. If virtue is the harmony of the soul and vice the disharmony, how can one soul be more harmonized, virtuous, or disharmonized, vicious, than another if all are simply reflections of a physical state? Yet we clearly observe vast differences in virtue and vice among people.
The analogy doesn't allow for moral variation or the soul's active role in guiding conduct.
Exactly. So on both logical contradiction with recollection and phenomenological grounds, moral agency, degrees of virtue, Socrates dismantles the harmony analogy.
Okay, Simmias is dealt with. But then Cebes steps up with another objection, one that feels perhaps even more grounded and harder to dismiss.
Yes, Cebes' objection is very practical, very down to earth. He's willing to grant Socrates a lot pre-existence, that the soul is much longer lasting and stronger than the body.
But he's worried about longevity versus true imperishability.
Right. He introduces the analogy of the weaver and the coat.
Explain that one.
So it says, think of an old weaver. He makes and wears many coats throughout his long life. Clearly, the weaver, representing the soul, is more durable than any single coat representing the body. He outlives many of them.
Okay, that seems reasonable. The soul might inhabit multiple bodies over time, perhaps through reincarnation.
Yes, Cebes concedes that possibility. But, he asks, does the weaver live forever?
No, eventually Weaver dies.
And when he dies, the last coat he made might still exist, might even outlive him for a short while.
Ah, I see the implication. The soul might be tough. It might wear out many bodies.
But perhaps it's not infinitely durable. Perhaps after many lifetimes, many labors, as Cebes puts it, the soul itself wears out and finally dissolves, maybe during the process of its last death, leaving its final coat, the body, behind.
This is a powerful challenge because it accepts Socrates' premises about pre-existence and durability, but questions the final step to absolute immortality. Longevity isn't the same as being indestructible.
Precisely. Sebes is saying, prove to me, Socrates, that the soul isn't just very long-lasting, but actually imperishable. If the soul can eventually wear out, then the philosopher's cheerful confidence in death is still misplaced fearlessness, born of ignorance about its ultimate demise.
This really puts the pressure on Socrates. He needs a final, definitive proof. So Sebes' weaver and coat analogy really raises the stakes. How does Socrates respond? He needs to prove not just duration, but absolute imperishability.
He does, and to do it, he actually shifts his method. He prefaces this final argument with a fascinating bit of intellectual autobiography.
Oh, right. He talks about his early interest in natural science.
Exactly. He says when he was young, he was really keen on figuring out the physical causes of everything, why things come to be, why they perish. He studied the natural philosophers.
But he became disillusioned.
Deeply. Especially with thinkers like Anaxagoras. Anaxagoras claimed that mind, nous, was the ultimate cause and arranger of all things, which excited Socrates.
That sounds promising. Mind is the ordering principle.
It did. But then Socrates says when he actually read Anaxagoras, he found that Anaxagoras didn't really use mind to explain why things are ordered the way they are, why it's best for them to be that way. Instead, he just fell back on explaining things through purely physical causes: air, ether, water, bones, sinews.
Socrates uses his own situation in prison as the example, doesn't he?
Perfectly. He says a natural scientist would explain him sitting there by talking about how his bones and sinews are arranged, how they bend, how air allows him to speak.
But that misses the real reason entirely.
Completely. The true cause, Socrates insists, is his choice, his judgment that it was better and more just to remain and accept the Athenian sentence rather than escaping to Megara as his friends wanted him to.
So the physical mechanics are just the necessary conditions for his action, not the cause. The cause is his mind, his decision based on what he judged to be good.
Precisely. He felt the natural scientist confused necessary conditions with true causes. Since he couldn't discover the ultimate true cause, the good, directly through their methods, he decided he had to take a second best approach.
Which is?
The method of hypothesis, which relies on the theory of forms. He says he starts by positing the existence of the absolute forms like beauty itself, goodness itself. Greatness itself is his foundational hypothesis.
Assuming these perfect concepts exist.
Yes. And then he accepts as true only those things that logically harmonize with this hypothesis and rejects what doesn't. This leads him to his specific theory of causality.
How does that work?
He insists, quite rigidly, that the only reason a beautiful thing is beautiful is because it participates in the form of absolute beauty. He rejects other, more complex or muddled explanations.
Like saying someone is taller by a head?
Right. He finds that confusing because a head is small. He says the only reason someone is tall is by participating in tallness itself, or greatness itself. The only reason two is because it participates in two-ness. It sounds almost simplistic, but it's about isolating the essential form as the sole true cause.
Okay, so he sets up this very strict framework. Forms exist, things get their qualities by participating in forms. How does this help him defeat the weaver analogy and prove imperishability?
Now comes a crucial step. The principle of the repulsion of opposites, or what we might call an exclusion principle.
We saw a hint of this with pleasure and pain, but this is more formal.
Much more formal and logical. He first establishes that essential opposites exclude each other. The form of greatness will never admit the form of smallness, and vice versa. They are fundamentally incompatible.
Okay, that seems straightforward.
But then he takes it a step further. It's not just the forms themselves that repel their opposites, but also the particular things that necessarily carry a certain form or quality. These things will also refuse to admit the opposite of the quality they carry.
Can you give an example of that? That's the tricky part.
He uses numbers and heat. The number 3, he argues, isn't just 3. By its very nature, it always brings with it the quality of oddness.
Right. 3 is always odd.
And oddness is the opposite of evenness. Therefore, the number 3, because it essentially carries oddness, will never admit evenness. If even approaches 3, the 3 must either withdraw or cease to exist altogether. It cannot become even while remaining 3.
Okay. And the fire example.
Similar logic. Fire essentially brings the quality of heat. Heat is the opposite of cold. Therefore, fire will never admit coldness. When cold approaches, the fire must either retreat or be extinguished. It cannot become cold and remain fire.
So, certain things have an essential nature that is fundamentally incompatible with the opposite of that nature. They will perish rather than accept that opposite.
Exactly. That's the principle. Now, he applies this precise logic to the soul.
All right, let's walk through it carefully.
Step 1. What is it that, when present in a body, makes it living?
The soul.
Right. The soul is that which brings the quality of life to the body. So life is the essential characteristic that the soul necessarily carries, just like 3 carries oddness and fire carries heat.
Okay. Step 2, what is the opposite of life?
Death.
Right. Step 3, the conclusion.
Therefore, the soul, which essentially and necessarily brings life, can never admit the opposite of life, which is death.
Just as 3 cannot admit evenness, the soul cannot admit death.
Exactly. When death approaches the person, the mortal part, the body, can die. But the soul, being that which brings life, must either withdraw or be annihilated, but it cannot become dead while remaining soul.
So the soul is athanatos, deathless, immortal.
Yes. And then he makes the final step, almost as an appeal to common understanding. If the soul is immortal, deathless, it must also be imperishable. He suggests it's inconceivable that something essentially immortal could be destroyed, referencing the idea that even God and the form of life itself are universally acknowledged as imperishable.
So if the soul is the very principle of life, it cannot die. And if it cannot die, it cannot be destroyed. It's indestructible.
That's the culmination of the argument. It directly addresses Sebi's weaver analogy by arguing the soul isn't just durable like the weaver, its very essence, life, makes it logically incompatible with destruction, death.
Wow. Okay, so Socrates has presented this intricate logical proof for the soul's immortality and imperishability. What's the impact of that conclusion? Where does the conversation go next?
It immediately pivots from metaphysics back to ethics, but now with incredibly high stakes. If the soul truly is immortal, then how we care for it becomes the most important task in existence.
Because the consequences last forever.
Exactly. Socrates warns that the danger of neglecting her, the soul, is awful. Death isn't an escape or an end. It's just the beginning of the soul's next journey. And there's no escaping the consequences of how you lived except by achieving the highest virtue and wisdom.
So what do you take with you? Not your possessions, obviously.
No. The only things the soul carries into the afterlife are its nurture and education, basically. Its character, the virtues or vices it has cultivated. These, he says, are what help or harm it right at the very start of its journey after death.
A badly nurtured soul struggles.
Yes, he describes the soul that has been too attached to the body, filled with its lusts and fears, as being heavy, weighed down by the earthly element. It finds it hard to leave the visible world and apparently lingers around tombs and graveyards before being drawn back into another bodily existence.
And to illustrate this further, he offers that kind of mythological picture at the end, doesn't he? The myth of the true earth.
He does. It's a way of framing the afterlife and the different potential destinations for the soul. He suggests that we, living here on Earth's surface, are like creatures living in a hollow, maybe like frogs around a pond.
We mistake our surroundings, the air, the water, for the whole universe.
Right. He imagines a true Earth far above us in the pure ether. This true Earth is vastly more beautiful and pure than our world.
How does he describe it?
As being made of incredible pure colors, brighter and clearer versions of the gems we know, like emeralds, jasper, gold. Everything there is more vibrant, more real.
And the beings who live there.
They live longer, healthier lives, free from disease. Their senses are sharper. They might even commune directly with the gods. This true Earth is the destination for the purified souls, especially the philosophers.
But not all souls go there immediately.
No. He describes a judgment process. The orderly, philosophical soul follows its divine guide easily to its proper place. But the soul polluted by earthly desires, or worse, by crimes like murder or sacrilege, has a much harder time.
It wanders or gets dragged to a place of punishment.
Yes, or it gets reincarnated into a form fitting its previous life's habit.
Like the gluttonous becoming donkeys.
He gives examples like that, yes. Gluttons and drunkards might become asses. Violent, unjust people might become wolves or hawks. Those who practiced ordinary civic virtue, temperance, and justice learned through habit, not philosophy, might become gentler social creatures like bees or ants, or perhaps moderate humans again.
But the highest destiny is reserved for the philosopher.
Absolutely. The soul, purified by philosophy, the true lover of learning who has detached from the body, goes to dwell with the gods in a place even fairer than the true earth, eventually living entirely without a body.
So, given this picture of eternal consequences, what's Socrates' final piece of advice to his friends right before he drinks the hemlock?
It's an exhortation to live virtuously. He tells them not to mourn his body, but to care for their own souls. The soul should be adorned not with external decorations, but with its proper jewels:
Which
temperance, justice, courage, nobility, and truth. These are the preparations needed for the soul's journey into eternity.
And then his very last words, they're quite famous and a little puzzling.
Crito, I owe a cock to Asclepius. Will you remember to pay the debt?
Asclepius, the god of healing. Why a debt to the healing god right at the moment of death?
It's generally interpreted as Socrates signifying that death itself is the cure. Life, especially life bound to the body with all its troubles and limitations, is the illness. By dying, his soul is finally being healed and released. Paying the debt is an acknowledgement of this final cure.
A remarkably serene and philosophical end, framing death not as a tragedy but as a remedy. So reflecting on this whole deep dive, we followed Socrates from that initial simple observation about pleasure and pain all the way through these really complex arguments, recollection proving pre-existence, the harmony and Weaver objections, and finally, that intricate proof of imperishability based on the exclusion of opposites.
It's an incredible intellectual journey he takes his friends and us on. In his final hours facing death, he's not offering simple comforts. He's building this rigorous, logical case for the soul's eternal nature.
It really underscores his commitment to reason right to the very end. This wasn't just about believing, it was about demonstrating as best he could why that belief was rational.
Absolutely, and I think the real takeaway here isn't just the historical curiosity or even whether you're ultimately convinced by every step of the logic. It's the method itself. It shows how powerful abstract reasoning can be in shaping our understanding of the biggest questions of life, death, the nature of reality.
He literally reasons his way from the fear and grief his friends feel towards a state of philosophical acceptance, even hope.
And it all comes back to that core idea of the philosophical life. That constant effort to purify the soul, to detach from the merely physical, and to prioritize the unseen, unchanging realities, the forms of truth, goodness, beauty, over the transient world of the senses.
The practice of dying, as he called it, becomes the practice of truly living, oriented towards eternity.
Exactly, and it does leave us with a really profound question to ponder, especially thinking about that doctrine of recollection, anamnesis. Well, if Socrates is right, if all our fundamental knowledge of absolute truths like justice, beauty, equality is actually just remembered from a pre-existent state, what does that mean for genuine discovery? Is it possible to learn something truly new at that fundamental level? Or is all profound learning just a process of uncovering what the soul, in some sense, already knew?